Good evening. Hello, welcome. My name is Patricia Phillips. I'm delighted to see you all here. A lot of familiar faces, a lot of new faces tonight. You know, President Reagan was both a man of faith and a great patriot. Therefore, we're going to begin our meeting tonight with an invocation by John Dunn, one of the elders here with it, deacon here with Bethel Orthodox Presbyterian Church, and then we'll be followed by Bob Miller with the Pledge of Allegiance. So, John.
Please bow with me. Our Father, we thank you for your historic lessons in the United States of America, for liberty, prosperity, and security we have enjoyed in abundance. And in our current state, we ask for your mercy for our failings and our transgressions against you as a nation. Have mercy on us and restore us, and we pray in particular tonight that you would work to expose and discredit the false ideas that afflict us today. May this discussion tonight tend toward that end. We ask in our Savior's name, amen.
Amen. Bob?
Stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated. So, are you enjoying the chill in the air and the liquid sunshine we've been having? We can always count on the weather to change, can't we? Does this every year in October, which reminds me of one of my favorite fortune cookie sayings. All time, I can remember to this day, or 30 years ago at a Chinese restaurant on Capitol Hill near where I used to work, and it said, that change is the only constant. Right? So, that is obviously our topic tonight, the theme of our meeting, and we're very pleased to be in a new venue tonight, one of our other changes. Thanks very much to Bethel Orthodox Presbyterian Church for hosting us. And one of the reasons that we change our venues every month is twofold. We have two reasons. One is that we want the meetings to be convenient to at least someone all of the time, right? And then the other reason is that by not having a set day and week, for example, the first Tuesday of every month, we can get some of these great, terrific speakers that will be able to fit it in with their busy schedules. So we're very pleased with that. So, thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, well, I'm corrected. One of the things that hasn't changed is the status of our 501c3 application. It's still held up at the IRS. So, which does remind me that we are a nonprofit organization. We are self-sustaining, and on page 8, I think that is, page 8 of your program, it talks about sponsorships, and we would greatly consider, we're always seeking business or personal sponsorships and contributions to the Ronald Reagan Lecture Series. We have suggested a $10 contribution, and we suggest that for two reasons. One, if you're bringing a bunch of neighbors, we want you to bring your neighbors without feeling that you have to drop a pretty penny. And two, we want people to be able to come here and listen to the ideas without a commitment to support our organization and what we're doing. But if you're supporting our effort to get conservative ideas out in the marketplace of ideas and discussed and in detail, one of the nice things is we have the luxury of time at this event. It's not a 60-second soundbite, it's a 60-minute lecture, and a lot of time for question and answer so there can be discussion as well. The one more administrative note, if you haven't completed one of our cards for the drawing, we have a great book, so I know you'll want to fill this out. It'll be quite timely, topical for tonight. The Delinquent Teenager Who Was Mistaken for the World's Top Climate Expert. So, no stuffing the ballot box, however, only one card per person. The, let's see. onto tonight's topic. I was on the web the other day, as we all are, and I've been on the web, as you might imagine, about climate change and getting ready for tonight. Although at the time I was just looking up addresses, and up came this little ad about you can fight climate change at the ballot box. Well, that was intriguing, so I clicked on that, and it read, from our teachers to our mayors to the experts at our military bases, Virginians know climate change is a threat to the Commonwealth. We can't afford to debate the science. We need to address the risk. Make sure our next governor isn't someone who denies the facts. Well, I'll tell you what, I am so pleased to have met Craig Rucker tonight and to have him as our speaker so he can help us examine those facts so that we will know the facts, and facts can't be denied. So we're delighted to have him. He is has been studying the subject for 20 years, and in that process founded the Center for a CFACT, I practice that, Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow. So we'll be eager to hear about that, and I urge you to look at the webpage. It is full of resources, little podcasts and tidbits of information, and just a tremendous resource of factual information out there addressing the topic of climate change. There's a very nice bio in your program. Please read that about Mr. Rucker if you have not already. And we are eager to have him shed the light of truth on these topics. It's been in the news a lot recently because of the UN organization that this book is about. It's an expose on this international or intergovernmental policy on climate change. So they've been in the news a lot recently for a recent meeting. I imagine Craig will get into that. So without further ado, I'm going to stop talking and introduce Craig Rucker. Please help me welcome him with a round of applause.
Thank you, Patricia, and also thank you, Bob and Linda and Dan, for having me come here tonight to speak at the Reagan Lecture Series. As was said, my name is Craig Rucker, and I serve as Executive Director of the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, or CFACT for short. I guess given that this is a Reagan Lecture Series, it probably is appropriate to give a very brief Reagan story. I actually had opportunity to meet Ronald Reagan once in my life. It was when I was a college freshman at SUNY Geneseo, a very liberal college in upstate New York. And I happened to be the chapter president of the Students for Reagan, which was not a ticket for popularity on that campus. But when I got wind that Ronald Reagan was coming to the Buffalo International Airport, Geneseo is not far from Buffalo, I decided to go with our whole club, I don't know, maybe 3 people, no, and go greet then Governor Reagan, and also my favorite congressman, who was from my district, Jack Kemp, at the airport. And when I showed up there, of course, I had to wait a long time in the freezing Buffalo cold, and out came Ronald Reagan smiling. He came down, we shook hands, talked about Nancy, a little bit of no, we just said hi, and I was a college student. And he just ushered himself into a press conference. I wanted to follow and hear, but I was stopped by Secret Service. They apparently thought with my long hair and everything I was a troublemaker. So I told you it's brief, that's my whole story. But to this day, I have never washed his hand in 30 years. Now, as was said, my name's Craig Rucker. I serve as Executive Director of the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, CFACT. And I co-founded this organization back in 1985 with another gentleman named David Rothbard. And the two of us formed this organization to try and bring sound science and free market principles to the environmental issue. It's a shameless plug here. I'll just tell you a little bit about it. We have a board of directors, I think is second to none, about 50 top scientists and academics from leading universities and laboratories around the world. We have a Just the Facts radio show that goes on about, I think it's 118 stations each weekday around the country. We have a collegians program of 40 campus chapters with a lot of students actually getting college credit, working for CFACT and helping us do various things from protests to all the different activities that we do. We are very well reported for our UN watchdog activities. I've gone to climate conferences and sustainable development conferences all over the world for over 20 years, and we are actually accredited as a UN organization. I don't know if they knew what they were doing when they did that, but nevertheless, we're grandfathered in and we continue to go to these conferences. Perhaps on this issue, which we're going to discuss tonight, we're best known for the work of one of our employees named Mark Morano, who's a frequent guest on Neil Cavuto. He is on Fox News all the time. He's on a lot of different programs. He's a former employee for Senator James Inhofe and worked on the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. And if you haven't seen his website, climatedepot.com, which is our website also, we're the ones who sponsor it, I recommend you do. He is considered by Rush Limbaugh to be the best source of global warming information. This is Rush speaking, other than himself, of course. So anyway, that's my shameless plug for our organization. So a lot of ground to cover, so I better get started here. climatedepot.com. All right, global warming hype. Well, I would say pretty much everybody in here is somewhat familiar with global warming. You have to almost be in a cave not to have seen the subject mentioned somewhere, usually on the TV, media, or elsewhere. Newsweek, when it actually had a publication, I think they went bankrupt recently, or they're not publishing anymore, and may have to change this slide, came up with this particular one that said the hot zone, blizzards, floods, hurricanes, blame global warming. And of course, the media has hyped this from day one of the issue, which started back in 1988. This was, in fact, one of the first banners I saw in a newspaper headline. It was, will palm trees replace pines on the Potomac? It sounded like a good idea to me back then. I was young, single, and yeah, that doesn't sound right. Anyway, that was one of the first ones. And then, of course, they started getting more and more ominous. You had Time magazine saying, be worried, be very worried, with a picture of a polar bear on an ice floe, which is something to be worried about. That's like seeing a bird in a tree. Of course, the New York Post, I think, put it best. They had a headline a little while ago that put it real simply in New York way, which you can read for yourself. Of course, it's not just the media that's hyping this, it's also Hollywood. You'll see it in global warming mentioned in a lot of different publications. And you will also see occasional movies about it. The day after tomorrow, I think it is what it was called. It's where Sydney is getting deluged by water. And that was a big hit a few years ago. Of course, you have the Oscar-winning An Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore. That was actually mandated to be seen in a lot of elementary schools around the country and still is. Marlo Lewis, a friend of ours from the Competitive Enterprise Institute, found something like 105 factual errors. Even a British court found that there were 8 very significant errors in this and mandated that when it is shown in school classrooms in England, they actually have to hand out a paper explaining to the children, here's some of the factual inaccuracies. Nevertheless, it continues to this day to be a very influential movie. We actually at CFACT had a recommended poster that we thought was a little better for this one, but Hollywood never took our example. Of course, it's not just Hollywood that's into this, it's also the actors and actresses. You have, for example, actor Leonardo DiCaprio, very outspoken on this particular issue. And I thought this quote was pretty good. He said, global warming is one of the most important issues facing all of humanity. We're in a situation right now where we're basically emitting too much of this carbon pollution from our cars and our electric power plants, and it's causing the planet to heat up. Leonardo thinks a lot about this as he drives around in his limos. And I actually got in trouble for this at one Earth Day event where he showed up for that. My favorite, of course, is John Travolta, who said that global warming is a very valid issue. I'm wondering if we need to think of other planets and dome cities. Everyone can do their bit, but I don't know if it's not already too late. Well, John Travolta, knows a little bit about living in dome cities. I thought that was a good sound effect. This is not, well, it kind of looks like a dome city, is not an airport. This is actually his house. The man actually, I guess, thinks about global warming as he's flying one of his 7 private jets around the world. So like Leonardo DiCaprio, who frets about cars, I guess he frets about global warming as he's flying airplanes. Of course, we have political figures. This is one of those few instances you'll see Jesse Jackson leading a bunch of white guys in a protest. This was dubbed the Million Snowman March back in 2006. Then you have this very scientific, very astute comment by Senator Debbie Stabenow that climate change is very real. Global warming creates volatility, and I feel it when I'm flying. The storms are more volatile. I'm sure all have flown. Do you notice that when you're flying, you get that little feeling in your tummy that you can tell global warming's there? This is a senator. Anyway, and then of course we have Barack Obama, who just I think it was July of this year in a Georgetown speech said, "I don't have much patience for anyone who denies that this challenge is real." Applause. "We don't have time for a meeting of the Flat Earth Society. Sticking your head in the sand might make you feel safer, but it's not going to protect you from the coming storm." So those who are skeptics, of course, are Flat Earth Society, and this is the type of rhetoric you see all the time from people who are proponents of climate change. But of course, the man of the hour, the one who personifies this issue more than anybody else, you know him, Al Gore. I particularly like this picture because it kind of looks like an Uncle Sam wants you. I kind of thought of it, Uncle Gore wants you. And of course, Al Gore has a lot of things he wants us all to do. He has some very definite things we need to do to fight climate change. One of them, for example, is he wants us to consider what kind of car you get. Buy cars and other products that have the least impact environmentally. Of course, what applies to you doesn't necessarily apply to him. The man has been driving limos and in fact got in trouble for this in Sweden. This is a headline from our Climate Depot where Gore left his car idling for 1 hour during his speech, opted for a Swedish government jet over public transportation. Why this is important is, believe it or not, in Sweden, you are not allowed to idle your car for more than 60 seconds because of global warming, right? That's actually the law in some places here in the United States. Poughkeepsie, New York, 10 minutes. That's how long you can idle your car there, and again, it's because of climate change. Well, strangely, he wasn't fined for this. He actually denied it for a while until a local newspaper actually had a picture and a video of the car idling for a half hour. And anyway, but you little people out there, watch what car you drive. Another thing that Al Gore wants us to do is consider a clock thermostat and set it so you're not using energy when you don't need it, when you're out of your house. Okay, so be careful how much energy you use in your house. Well, the Tennessee Public Policy Institute looked into how much Gore uses for his house. And what did they find? In August 2006 alone, Gore burned through 22,619 kilowatts, guzzling more than twice the electricity in 1 month than the average American family uses in an entire year. Okay? Now, by the way, as a follow-up to this, he got a lot of heat for this particular hypocrisy. So he actually put in solar panels. He used geothermal energy to heat his home and things of that sort. So the Tennessee Public Policy Institute went back 1 year later and did another audit. Electricity bill went up. Only Gore. All right. Gore, of course, isn't limited to telling you individually what you should do. He has something to say for our whole nation. He says, as I've said for many years throughout this land, we're borrowing money from China to buy oil from the Persian Gulf, to burn it in ways that destroy the future of human civilization. Every bit of that has to change. He does not want our country doing business with those people in the Middle East, right? Well, of course, it sat on the board of a firm called Current TV. And when it came time to sell that, who did he sell it to? Al Jazeera. So, and he netted for himself about $100 million, according to Fox News. So anyway, while this may be a career killer for many of the people in this room, it wasn't for Al Gore, of course. This is a gentleman who, again, won an Oscar and won not only that, but the Nobel Prize, something that he can share with Yasser Arafat. The person standing next to him is a guy named Pachauri, who is the head of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And he was representative of the thousands of scientists that he apparently is in charge of. So, why the fear? Well, you know the story. Global war, oh, well, here's Al Gore telling us in case we didn't know. Every night in the news now practically is like a nature hike through the book of Revelation, right? And media is telling you that. We have, of course, through global warming, the warming of the earth, which means what? More droughts, right? Less water. The planet's going to heat up, more heat-related deaths. We're going to see an increase in wildfires. President Obama just said that recently. We're going to see more tornadoes. And of course, this warming up isn't going to be limited to that. It's also going to crack the ice down in the Antarctic. And we're going to see calving like we've never seen it before. And that means, well, you know what it means for the polar bears. I took this picture actually in Durban, and I know you can't see it very clearly, but I thought it was kind of ironic. This section says, more climate change means less water. Right now, and these are UN posters. Right next to it says, more climate change means more floods. That's actually accurate. That's what they're saying. And of course, the floods are going to be bad. This is a poster by Greenpeace. The greater danger to this skyline is not Arab terrorism. What is it? Global warming. And in fact, you got Hollywood showing you what we can expect. We'll see the Statue of Liberty flooded like we've never seen it flooded before, from the melting polar caps and the rising sea levels. But here's something that you perhaps didn't know. It's not just that these things will impact nature and the natural world. These will impact you personally. For example, the WHO says if you care about your health, you should care about climate change, because there's going to be food poisoning if we don't do something about climate change. These are all designed to get you interested, because of course people are interested in their health. Well, maybe you're not interested in your health. How about your safety? All right, well, your safety's at stake. You realize when that I-35 bridge in Minneapolis collapsed, a former Clinton administration official said, what's to blame? Global warming. So, care about your health? Care about your safety? Well, maybe you don't. Do you care about women? Especially poor women? Do you realize that climate change pushes poor women to prostitution? Okay, guys, you don't care about that either. You don't care about your health, your safety, you don't care about women. What do all liberal causes ultimately come down to? The children, yes. Last year, recent record number of children die in hot cars, blamed on man-made global warming, according to the Associated Press. All right, I would note that we're in Virginia, so there's probably a few of you hunters, Duck Dynasty types out there who don't care about women, children, your own health, your own safety, that type of stuff. Well, they got you covered too, all right? If you don't care about all those things, Bubba, how about this? Global warming will impact your beer. Okay? This is from a climatologist from the Czech Hydrometeorological Institute, says that the quality of your hops will actually deteriorate as their temperatures warm. So there you go. Actually, you'll find that in issue after issue, that's actually been ridiculous just how much the global warming crowd attributes to climate change. There's a website that actually chronicles this, kind of humorously. This is just the A's that you're looking at. You got AIDS, you got ancient forests dramatically changed, Antarctic ice grows, attack of killer jellyfish. This is the B's, this is the C's. It goes on and on and on, all the different things that you can find. My favorite, though, my personal favorite, is this one right here. Did you know that a team of American researchers speculate that extraterrestrial environmentalists could be so appalled by our planet polluting ways that they view us as a threat to the intergalactic ecosystem and try to destroy us? Now, I would pass this off as being just a bunch of kooks, but no, this thought-provoking scenario is one of many envisioned in a joint study by Penn State and the NASA Planetary Science Division. Your tax dollars at work. What are they saying? They're saying extraterrestrials will come to our planet. They will see that we're polluting it and destroy us. Okay. What's the real science? Well, the basic science, as many of you are familiar, works like this. Our planet is surrounded by greenhouse gases. These gases allow the solar radiation to enter into the Earth's atmosphere, and some of it, of course, gets absorbed by the Earth, and the rest of it goes back into the atmosphere and bounces back from these greenhouse gases. Some of it gets emitted into space. These greenhouse gases trap the heat that comes in from the sun and also the thermal heat that comes out of the Earth. And it's a good thing. Even Al Gore said this in his Inconvenient Truth. Without these greenhouse gases, we would be a lifeless orb like the moon. Now, one of the things that may surprise you is where are these greenhouse gases made up of? While you may see in the news reports time and time again that greenhouse gases are our carbon dioxide and carbon emissions from our power plants, our smokestacks, our factories, our tailpipes, actually the vast bulk of it is in the form of water. If you could look at this right here, this is the largest greenhouse gas, and 95% of all the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are water vapor. The one that's receiving all the attention is this right here, which is carbon dioxide. Now, this is another chart which it's a little maybe hard to read, but water vapor is almost 100% created by Mother Nature. Carbon dioxide is almost all created by nature, but for 3%. So all the debate that you're seeing is really about that little sliver right there, that 3%. Why is that a big deal? Because the Earth is in a delicate balance. And adding to that 3%, even just a little bit, according to the environmentalists, it's going to throw us way out of balance. That's the theory. How out of balance? Well, first off, they make the claim that for the last millennia, we've been kind of at about 280 to 320 parts per million. We recently went over 400 parts per million. You'll see graphs like this by the UN all the time. This little blue right here indicates about the last 100 years or so, and you'll see a slight uptick. This green is all projections, all right? And that's what you'll often see the UN do. The projections look totally terrifying. There's a lot of reason not to believe that it'll do that, but it does look scary. And of course, we have experienced, and even skeptics will agree with this, about a 1 degree Fahrenheit or 0.6 degrees Celsius increase in global temperatures since 1880. All right, are the scientific claims surrounding climate change beyond dispute? Well, here's a chart that you'll often see, or one like it, put out by the UN. And it goes back to 1880. Whoop, wrong one. Goes back to 1880. Now, if you follow that trend, you'll notice that if this is the mean, that it was a little bit cooler, got a little bit warmer, kind of went down in the 60s and 70s. Some of you may remember the great global cooling scare in the 70s. Stephen Schneider, who was a proponent of that, was a big one, saying that the world is going to face an increasing colder climate than changed in the 1980s and joined the global warming bandwagon. And then, of course, you see a rapid increase in temperature. This is not as big of a deal as you would think. If you were to actually look at a line that was drawn, it would look like a straight line. If you blow it up, it looks extremely warped. But we'll give credit where credit's due. It does look like there's a warming trend over the last century. This is not really that disputed. What it fails to do, though, two things. Number one is global warming proponents would agree that this warming, which is about half the warming, has nothing to do with man-made emissions, or very little, if anything. So that's a mystery how that increased, even by their own admission. They're claiming this is the part that is really impacted by our tailpipes and smokestacks. So of this 1 degree, the question remains, what caused this to go up? Wasn't our emissions. Interestingly, too, this only goes back to 1880, which is the end of a very cold era in human history called the Little Ice Age. Taking a more broad look at it, Well, this is what the Greens presented in their third assessment report a few years back. This does look alarming. It's called the famous man hockey stick graph. It shows that temperatures for a long time were straight, and if not going down, then all of a sudden you see a big spike. Looks pretty convincing. This chart's been totally discredited. How did he get the temperature readings in the past? There were no thermostats in the days of the Vikings, right? He used what's called proxy data, tree rings. And he didn't even do a very good job of that. And he stuck on the end of the proxy rings real temperature data that has been taken since the 1880s. That's how he came up with this. Well, when a couple of researchers actually looked at it, because it was widely known that during the medieval warming period, it was at least as warm as it is today, if not warmer, and that was absent in there. They used his own data, came up with this, and to their credit, the United Nations backtracked, disowned that man's hockey stick, and this is one that is more in keeping with what they say occurred. And this paints a little different picture. Of course, what they're showing you in the media is just here, which is that big spike, right? But what you see if you go back to the medieval warming period is about the same temperature, with it being very cool at the earlier point and then rising. Scientists who have taken this back even further note that the temperature tends to do that. There was a warming time back in the time of the Romans, warmed up in the time of the Vikings, warmed up again now. What you're seeing today is not outside the range of natural variability. Other researchers have looked at it and actually said that using proxy data, because since 2003 when that first one came out, there's been a lot of science that's come out. This is a couple of scientists' reconstruction of probably what it was like, but you'll notice that as we continue to get more information, that medieval warming period gets warmer and warmer, and today's temperatures do not seem like they're that warm compared to the past. Interestingly, the IPCC within the last 2 weeks came out with a report, their fifth assessment report. If you had come out and said that the medieval warming period in the time of the Vikings is as warm as it is today, you would have been laughed off, you would have been a flat earther, right? Within the last 2 weeks, the IPCC has basically agreed that it was as warm back then as it is today. They said continental scale surface temperature reconstructions show with high confidence multi-decadal intervals during the medieval climate, they call it anomaly, from 950 to 1250 that were in some regions as warm as in the late 20th century. This is a remarkable change. They're agreeing that it was as warm back then as it is today. Of course, they have this kind of statement at the end that says these intervals did not occur as coherently across seasons and regions as warming in the late 20th century, high confidence. Nevertheless, baby steps. They come a long way. What's about the most recent years is the CFAC billboard in Washington, D.C. If you are in the second grade or lower, which doesn't look like anyone in this room, you've experienced no global warming in the last 16 years. This has shocked the scientific community. No global warming. So we put these billboards all around just to show people and kind of provoke them. None of the climate models projected that. Of 36 climate models that were put out in the 90s, 38 models, 36 of them got it wrong. The temperature trend is right there. These are what all the models said the warming would be today. This caught everybody off guard, and by the way, is admitted by the UN IPCC. Okay, moving along. Are hurricanes and severe weather events getting worse? Well, certainly that is the position of Al Gore. You might have said, you can remember this maybe from his movie An Inconvenient Truth. He said, how in God's name could that happen here? He's talking about Hurricane Katrina. Of course, there's never been hurricanes that have hit the southern coast of, Alabama and Mississippi. So anyway, he said that this could not be, we're going to see more and more hurricanes. They're going to be more intense. They're going to be continuing to get worse as we continue to increase in carbon emissions. Dr. William Gray, one of the foremost hurricane experts in the world, looked at that issue and found this, that from 1900 to 1949, which is before man-made emissions would impact hurricanes and the sort, and then he looked at it during the last half of the century, when Gore said it would be getting worse and worse. And you'll find in every single category, from named storms, hurricanes, intense hurricanes, all the way across the board, if anything, there's decreasing frequency. Now, that was confirmed, of course, by the National Hurricane Center. You see an increasing trend in that graph. What about, since Al Gore made that claim in his movie, An Inconvenient Truth, that it'd be getting worse and worse? It's a strange thing. Al Gore, every time he speaks, we actually call it the Gore effect. Almost the exact opposite occurs. We have now reached a record that has not been set since the Civil War of the fewest Category 3+ hurricanes that has ever been measured in this country. Almost 3,000 days of no Category 3 hitting the United States. And by the way, the IPCC assessment report concurs now. Back a few years ago, if you had made this statement, you would have been laughed out, you would have been mocked out, you would have said you're a flat earther. Of course, everybody knows they're getting worse and worse. But the IPCC says that, one more time, says that evidence suggests a slight decrease in the frequency of tropical cyclones making landfall in the North Atlantic and South Pacific, and little evidence exists of any longer-term trend in other ocean basins. So we're seeing fewer of them. Then, of course, we have the president. Earlier this year, say that heat waves, droughts, wildfires, and floods all are more frequent and more intense. He could not have picked 3 areas to be more wrong. Droughts. People have heard of the Great Dust Bowl of the 1930s, of course, right? They are not something that is new and modern to our era. This is a chart put out by the National Climatic Data Center. The way to read this chart right here is everything above this line are wet years. Everything below this line are dry years. Man-made global warming would be in this section. Prior to man-made global warming would be in this section. Do you see more droughts back here or more droughts since we've had all these emissions of cars and factories? This would be right here, the Dust Bowl era, the 1950s, etc. There's been decreases in droughts. And the IPCC, in fact, actually agrees with us. I like this is the one that just came out 2 weeks ago, what they said on the bottom statement. They say, based on updated studies, AR4, which was their last assessment report in 2007, regarding global increasing trends in drought since the 70s, were probably overstated. Wildfires. Are they getting more frequent? That's the other thing the president said. Well, this is a chart over the last 40 years. Does this look like this is how many were back in around the 60s up through the 80s, and this is what we're seeing today? Does that look like an increasing trend in wildfires? And in fact, Bjorn Lomborg, who heads the Copenhagen Consensus, made this comment. He said that historical analysis of wildfires around the world shows that since 1950, their numbers have decreased globally by 15%. All right? Sea level rise. You remember this picture. We're going to see massive flooding, correct? Well, that was the prediction of some environmentalists. You had Jeff Goodall for Rolling Stone saying that sea level rise could be more than 6 feet by the end of the century. All right, and then that was outdone by NASA's James Hansen, who said it would be, 75 feet. Well, if in fact they were correct, it does look like the Statue of Liberty might be toast. But what does NOAA say? Well, actually, they say it's more on the level of about 1.1 to 1.3 millimeters per year is what it is. That's about the size of a nickel. Take a lot of nickels to flood the Statue of Liberty. Interestingly, this is something that's not disputed by climate skeptics either. Sea level rise is a natural phenomenon that's been going on for millennia. The seas have been rising. The question is it rising more fastly now or in the past? Well, in fact, the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee looked at it. And they came up with the kind of a report of what NOAA said and what all the various scientific bodies said. And their report said that actually the sea level rise was greater in the first half of the 20th century when there was less CO2. There's been a decline in sea level rise in the latter half of the 20th century. And NOAA's data indicates that the actual rate of sea level rise isn't 6 feet, isn't 75 feet. It's about 7 inches by the end of the century. Melting glaciers. Again, Most skeptics will concur that the glaciers are melting globally. This is a phenomenon that actually predates any discussion of climate change. Some say it was a result of the last ice age. Who knows? But there is a consensus, I hate to use that word, that the ice sheet has been melting. And there's historical evidence of this. This is a painting of a glacier in southeastern France back in 1850. And you'll notice that that same painting just a little while later, in 66, shows that that glacier has retreated. This is a scene from Al Gore's movie. And of course, when Al Gore's telling it, he's saying, look at this glacier, 1940. Look at this glacier today. Melting, global warming, case closed, right? Well, kind of. What he doesn't show you, though, is this picture, which is a glacier in 1950. Why doesn't he show you that? Because 1950 predates any possibility of his claim being true. That glacier's been melting for a long time. Again, prior to 1960 or that, they are not saying that any of that melting occurred was a result of man-made emissions. And you'll notice that that glacier retreated all the way to that rock on the right here. Most of the melting occurred prior to when man-made emissions could have been a factor. What are we finding as these glaciers start to melt? Interesting things. Ellesmere Island in Canada. As a glacier retreated, this is kind of a barren tundra area, they discovered trees. These trees don't grow there. They grow way south of there. What were those trees doing under this glacier? They've found ancient forests under a frozen tomb in Alaska. Again, these trees are not found in that region. They're also uncovering things in the Swiss Alps now. They now found a road that Romans used to use to traverse through the Alps. Nobody knew that road existed until the glacier retreated. And they're finding artifacts like coins and tunics and the like. Tim Ball, a climatologist from Canada, actually has a picture of a Roman mine that nobody knew existed in the Swiss Alps either, that obviously they could mine back in the time of Rome, but has been since covered and was lost to all mankind, and nobody had knowledge of it until the glacier melted. Interesting stuff. And in fact, we're finding things like whole villages of Eskimos are now being discovered as the ice starts to retreat. This is also true with Viking settlements as well. What about the Arctic ice cap? Well, of course, the UK Guardian, a lot of them have said that the final collapse of the sea ice will be within 4 years. There was a prediction back in 2007 that said the summer ice in the Arctic will disappear by the year 2013. Again, just like Al Gore, when they make these predictions, almost the exact opposite occurs. This is what the ice looked like. It did look like it last year, that they may be correct, because there was a serious lack of sea ice, as you can see in this portion of the chart. So much so that a lot of people were saying, hey, you know, we can now traverse the Northwest Passage, and that hasn't been done since 1908. Anyway, within the last year, a 60% growth in ice occurred. Now, this is actually kind of a funny story, because what happened is, in 2012, when these alarms came out and everybody said, hey, you know what, the Arctic's going to be ice-free, you had all these Greens go up there to try to PR global warming, and they started sailing through that passage up there and sailing around, trying to make sport of it and saying, hey, you know, there's global warming, we can sail up here. Well, guess what happened just in September of this year? A lot of them got... Those boats got stuck. Icebreakers had to come and rescue a good many of them. You know what? A good many of them they could not rescue. They're still stuck there. Not the people, they got them out, but the boats are stuck there. So anyway, that's par for the course. Antarctic ice sheet. Antarctic is peculiar. You'll see, for example, on the eastern Antarctic, a significant growth of the ice sheet. On the western part, you'll see some melting. Whenever you see the pictures of the Arctic that are melting, it's usually this portion right up here that they take pictures of. It jets out into the sea, it's at the furthest extremity, you'll see calving and all that type of stuff, and they'll say, hey, you know, the Arctic is all melting. That was the big thing, especially in the 90s. You didn't hear too much about the Arctic, you always heard about the Antarctic back then. Why don't we hear about the Arctic today? Because it's growing. In fact, we have a record amount of sea ice since they started keeping records. And with specific respect to the Antarctic, it's an all-time record. This is this year in ice extent. This is all the other years since they've been keeping record. This year was number one. Totally not anticipated by the climate change people. Polar bear hype. There's a lot I could say about polar bears, but CFAC, we decided to try, how can we get the message out there about polar bears? So what we did is we rented a billboard, which is our case. We like to do things like protests and all, we like to have fun with this. And we did one right outside of JFK, and this to me, basically, let's see if it works with you all. Can you read it? 1960, 5,000 polar bears. Today, 25,000 plus polar bears. All right, this is Stop Global Warming hype. What they are finding, interestingly, regarding polar bears, is that there are sections of the Arctic that are warming, and there are sections that are cooling. All right? David Legates from the University of Delaware has studied polar bears. He's actually an advisor of ours, informal advisor. And he found an interesting, and this is actually using World Wildlife Fund data, that the polar bears are actually moving from the colder sections to the warmer sections. The areas where it's colder in the Arctic, which I don't know how cold is cold, but the colder areas, they don't particularly like. They like moving to the warm. So they like global warming. Kind of like this picture right here. If we're going to have global warming, may as well make the most of it, right? All right, what are the motivations of these people? It's always difficult when you look, and I've traveled to climate conferences for a lot of years. I was in Kyoto during the Kyoto Protocol. I've been in, right from day one, we were involved in the Earth Summit. I was actually invited to meet President Bush I with Morton Blackwell, called in, and we were going to tell him, don't sign any global climate agreement. He canceled at the last minute. We did not go in, and he did not take our advice. He decided to sign a climate agreement because it would make him look more environmental and help him with the election. We see how well that worked. And anyway, so having followed this for a long time, I actually would say that this is my own personal opinion as to what are the motivations. I would say that I have met people that I would call true believers. There are people, and I would put in that category people like the scientist who kicked it all off, James Hansen, who actually do believe the science. He believes, he's the one who said that the oceans will rise 75 feet and wipe out the Statue of Liberty, despite the fact NOAA and even now the IPCC say it's millimeters per year. Doesn't matter. He believes what he's going to believe, and that's why he believes it. And this is him getting arrested, by the way. I don't know what he was doing here. I think it was for the Keystone XL pipeline. The other people that are true believers tend to be college students, right? Save the polar bears. They don't know any better. With certain people, the belief is almost of a religious nature. I have been at meetings, including Kyoto, where they actually hold hands and they hum and they, there's no getting them informed about this issue because you don't want to get them informed because they're not going to listen to you anyway. So you have your true believers. You also have what I would call your money grabbers. And in this category, I would first and foremost put universities, government, and the United Nations. Joanne Nova, who's an advisor of ours from Australia, researched how much money is going to the global warming cause. And it turns out it's around $4 billion per year in the United States, or about $72 billion since this whole crisis has started. That's an astounding amount of money. That's an astounding amount of money. And you figure that when you hear stories like Dr. William Gray will tell you, he used to be a gentleman who was funded through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. When he came out with a report that said global warming wasn't that bad, he was immediately cut off by then Senator Al Gore. There's penalties to be paid. He's not the only one. Reggie Newell, Sherwood Itzo, there's a bunch of people who, when taking on the climate establishment, have seen their funding cut dramatically. And of course, it's a big budget item for the Environmental Protection Agency, and it's both parties. I remember talking to Connaughton in the Bush administration, who was actually proud of the fact that, this is the Bush II, that the Bush administration had spent, $17 billion during the first 5 years on climate change research. And that's more than they spent on AIDS. And I was going, okay, did you a lot of good? But anyway, there's a lot of money out there, and we know that a lot more has been spent since Obama's been in. And of course, the United Nations, which likes to hold conferences in places like, well, you name it, Copenhagen and The Hague and in Marrakesh and Kyoto, never Toledo or places like that, also has a lot invested in this. Companies are also involved in this. Those who want to invest in the green economy are making all sorts of money on the climate change issue as well. So you got your true believers, your money grabbers. The last one is the most dangerous. They would be what I would call the political and ideological crowd. It started right off the bat. Former Senator Tim Wirth said, we've got to ride the global warming issue. Even if the theory of global warming is wrong, we will be doing the right thing in terms of economic policy and economic and environmental policy. So he's saying, even if we're wrong, we've got to pursue this. I was actually at this and heard French President Jacques Chirac say, for the first time, humanity is instituting a genuine instrument of global governance. He was saying that about the Kyoto Protocol in 2000 in The Hague. Then you got German EU Commissioner Connie Hedegaard, who more recently said, this was actually this year, she said that let's say that that science, some decades from now, said we were wrong, it was not about the climate. Would it not, in any case, have been good to do many of the things you have to do in order to combat climate change? You'll often hear that. You'll hear even the president say that. Well, what are some of these things they want to do? Well, here's one of them. They want to redistribute your wealth. This is actually another CFAC billboard in Denver, right outside Mile High Stadium. This is Ottmar Endorfer, who's the United Nations IPCC, who says one must say clearly that we redistribute the world's wealth by climate policy. Hey, we're doing the right thing, right? Take your money, give it to other people, that's good stuff, right? What about having the government set your thermostat for you, as they had in California? All right, that was actually a proposal out there in order to both save energy and combat climate change. Then, of course, you got a German climate guy who says that he wants to propose the creation of a CO2 budget for every person on the planet, regardless of whether they live in Berlin or Beijing. Would you like to have your own carbon ration? The government monitoring how many miles you drive, which, by the way, is another proposal. Telling you what you're being punished if you have too many plane flights, that sort of thing. Before you think this is too far-fetched, this was also something that was proposed in Britain, where every adult in Britain should be forced to carry a carbon ration card, says a member of parliament. This is how out to lunch these guys go. So there is something to be concerned about with the global warming hype. What can you do? Briefly, I would say the first and foremost thing you can do is get informed, get plugged in. We offer you our climatedepot.com website, and I would recommend that you visit it often. There are other sources. What's up with that? There's a bunch of other ones that you'll see links to as well on our website, but learn the facts. Secondly, you should try to educate others, and that would include elected officials, though I can't say that. I guess this is a 501c3. Well, you're not a 501c3 yet, right? All right, educate others. I would say support skeptic groups. You could support ours, but there's other ones too, the Heartland Institute, the Competitive Enterprise Institute. There are a number of groups out there that are fighting the good fight. And last of all, you should remain optimistic. And I say you should remain optimistic because despite the overwhelming odds, despite all the money that's been spent on the other side, we are winning. Surprise, surprise. No Kyoto Protocol was not signed, and we never ratified it. You will find that they're coming up with another treaty in Paris in 2 years. They got a long way to go for that. China has said it will never sign on, India the same way. This provides opportunity for those who are skeptics to continue to sow the seeds of discord necessary to prevent all this from happening to you. So that's my formal presentation for right now. What I'd like to do is, if there's any questions, entertain those at this point.
If you have any questions, please come on over here and you can ask it right here. Not to the mic, but feel free to ask your question.
The last two National Geographics, one of them had a Statue of Liberty going underwater, and this most recently said a articles saying that there's hundreds of different sensors on all the glaciers, and they're all showing that the glaciers are all melting. And it was a extremely convincing article. And I was just wondering, if those National Geographic, Discover, Believe, Popular Science are all pushing the global warming hype.
Absolutely. In fact, the media in general is, and you'll find that part of the rationale for that is I'm not the first to say that, is it does sell publications. When you're making claims about, the fact that the Statue of Liberty is going to sink, that's a lot more interesting than that the ocean will rise by 7 inches by the end of the century. All I can say is that the actual facts are, and this is what NOAA says, this is what even the UN is saying right now, is we're talking millimeters per year. So there, it would take, how many nickels would you have to stack in order to reach the height of the Statue of Liberty where it's being flooded? And the ice sheet's growing, which actually, and in fact, when they are measuring it, we're finding that as I said before, that the actual rise of the oceans is slower today than it was in the first half of the 1900s. So these are things that, we can give the facts, but again, you can't stop her. National Geographic's been sold out on this stuff for a long time. They've bought or drank the global warming Kool-Aid. I personally would not take too much stock in it.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm going to go a little further with this. I've been looking at sunspot data, and we're in solar cycle 24 right now, which was originally predicted by NASA to be one of the worst in 200 years. Well, it turned out it was one of the lightest in over 100 years. Mm-hmm. And what I'm seeing in the data, it looks like solar cycle 25 may have no sunspots, which brings us back to the 1600s and the Magan minimum, when it was one of the coldest periods in the last couple of millennia. So I guess what I'm, as someone who lives over the mountain near you, I'm wondering, do we have any data? I know they talk about how the Thames was frozen over during that time in the 1600s, but wonder what the climate was like in the 1600s in North America.
No, it was global, and what you're saying is actually true. So it was.
I'd like to have. We don't have a lot of.
No, we don't have a lot.
Data here like they do in Europe. So.
That's correct, but it would be global in impact, obviously, if the sun did that. So it would be the northern hemisphere. I know that we have a scientist named Dr. Sally Baliunas from Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. Another one, Dr. Willie Soon, who serve as advisors of ours, and they've made this claim right from the beginning of this debate that the sun's influence on climate is tremendous. And, they show charts that show a real close correlation between temperature and solar activity. And there are other theories that skeptics have. I've heard the Pacific Oscillation, some have even used lunar, but the one that I agree with you seems to be very convincing is the idea that the sun impacts the warmth of the planet. Imagine that, the sun impacts the warmth of the planet. Anyway, the Russians have actually gone forward. They're actually moving on the basis that they believe what you're saying is true. They're actually projecting cooler temperatures. I go kind of by Al Gore. If Al Gore says it's going to get hotter and hotter,
Isn't it true we're going to need some global warming soon? We're in the middle of between an ice age. I understand that Chicago was under 1 mile of ice about 30,000 years ago, and now we're headed in the other direction, back to an ice age. So we may need some global warming. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, and then I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and I can remember, and people saying, sorry about that, I hear that. Anyway, especially our football team. But anyway, I was going to say that when I grew up in the 70s, all you heard about was the coming ice age, because in the 70s it was very cold. We had what was called the blizzard of 77. I think Parker Brothers made a game out of it. We were out of school for like a month. You could walk along the snow banks along the telephone wires. It was so bad back then. All right, so and of course the people like Stephen Schneider came out and said that this was a result of our pollution. It was blocking the sunlight, causing more and more cooling and that. And then, of course, they all jumped on the global warming bandwagon when temperatures started going up. But yes, a book was written, and I'd recommend it for you. It's by Dr. Fred Singer, and Dennis Avery called Global Warming Every 10,000 Years. That's the name of the title. And basically it makes the claim that you are. It says that about every 10,000 years the world goes through a cool period, of which many of them are ice ages. And so yes, there is a real possibility we could be seeing a prolonged period of time, whether it leads to an ice age or not, or mile-high sheets under Chicago. Chicago doesn't have still mile-high sheets. I've been there recently and it's quite cold at times, but no. But anyway, I was going to say that that is one of the things that has been talked about.
Yeah, I'm going to go even further back in time to 100 million years ago, back in the Cretaceous period with dinosaurs.
Okay.
And back then, climate was several degrees hotter and life continued to flourish and was in fact larger than it is today. Has that ever been brought up in the global warming versus anti-skepticism? Yeah.
Yes, it has. Dr. Ed Krug is one of them that I know, the soil and water scientist from the Illinois State Water Survey. He published stuff on that. They actually have a term for it back then. They call it the climate optimum. And they have found that in recent years that that a warmer planet is actually a better planet. And that CO2, far from being pollution, is actually plant food. And the more CO2 you have in the atmosphere, the larger plants get. Dr. Sherwood Itzo, University of Arizona, did this with orange trees. He actually has one set of orange trees in normal air temperature, and then he pumps another one full of CO2 that would be in a CO2 enriched atmosphere. Which ones do you think grow bigger? One of the things they always tell you the bad things that happen with more and more climate, with more and more CO2, but actually it may be just the opposite. It may be actually beneficial to both plants and animal, and you will see an increase in biodiversity and plant growth and crop yields and the whole thing that go with it with more CO2.
Hi, so I am an environmental consultant by profession with a specialty in Clean Air Act compliance. So I essentially quantify emissions for a living.
Good you're not the EPA, we'd be suing you right now. But
so just looking forward, in the last 9-10 years I've been doing this, certainly I've seen an increase in the the global warming aspect of my business. Now you have to quantify greenhouse gas emissions in order to do your annual reporting, in order to apply for permits and things like that. EPA has set some precedent as far as delisting toxic pollutants, where studies have shown that they are not as toxic and have therefore been removed from the target lists. Any hope that this might make its way in however many years to EPA and perhaps reverse a decision? Well,
it would have to be another administration. I mean, the Obama has made very clear that, and he's being disingenuous with the public. He says that a court, and a famous Massachusetts decision, is making his EPA have to regulate carbon dioxide as a pollutant. Obama is very generous with using the word pollution when he says carbon dioxide. The Supreme Court is about to have a hearing, though, on whether or not the EPA used the right science. And CFAC's weighed in on that. We've actually put an amicus in on it, and a lot of other groups do, to have them review based on the latest data as to whether or not CO2 is some planet-killing compound created by man, or whether CO2 is, as we like to say, plant food. So the Supreme Court's going to mull this over. This court, tough to say. They generally like to let the EPA and government do whatever it wants to do, so I don't remain optimistic. Another administration would be better hope. Provide more opportunity to change it.
Your speech is very, very good presentation, and I'm reminded of back when I was in engineering school 35 years ago, and they taught us that these mathematical models that we love so dearly all depend on assumptions and boundary conditions. If your assumptions are bad, your mathematical model is bad. If your boundary conditions, that's where your model ends, doesn't end at the right place, your model is bad. Now, the world climate is an extremely complex system with feedback and infinite boundary conditions and infinite assumptions. So all the models that I've seen, I consider them a joke. They don't have enough data, they don't go far enough back. The boundary conditions are not explained to the public that these scientists so easily fool. The assumptions are not explained to the public that these scientists so easily fool. And I'm sure you've seen this.
Well, yeah, and as a matter of fact, one of my slides, which I pointed out, was showing that the climate models were horrible. 36 out of 38 of them did not predict any flatline temperature. One of the ways you can test these computers to see if they're good, and this has been suggested, is run them in reverse. See if they can explain the past. If they can be good indicators of the future, they should be able to tell us what happened in the past, right? Fair? No, they do terrible jobs of that. So you do find in the climate field, the people who tend to support us are the people who look at the actual observed data. In other words, they actually look at the thermostats, they look at the incidences of hurricane, the stuff that's out there, the hard data. The people who tend to be on the other side, and it's not universal, but tend to be, are the people who have a real belief in the models. And there happens to be more of them, or at least they get a lot more press, of the people who believe in the models, which garbage in, garbage out, versus what I would consider to be the more solid climatologist or weather people.
You know, one of the problems I have is that it seems that these people have exactly inverted the scientific method. Rather than coming up with a hypothesis and trying to prove it, they come up with a conclusion and do not try to disprove it.
You hit the nail on the head. In fact, I've often said it's kind of like the way the scientific method works is somebody postulates a theory, you put a firing squad around it, everybody takes shots at it, and if it's still standing at the end of the day, it's a good theory, right? The way the global warming theory works is the reverse. They hypothesize, the firing squad points outward, and anybody who tries to challenge that theory gets shot. And it has been a corruption of the scientific method for sure. All right.
Another thought too is that it really bothers me when they talk about consensus and settled science. Science is rarely settled. 500 years ago it was believed that the Earth was the center of the universe. From 1923 to 1956, it was believed that there were 24 chromosome pairs in the human body.
Right.
Because somebody made a mistake in counting them in order to discover that we had better microscopes.
I've been at these UN meetings. I always ask them, what does consensus mean? And it's always interesting to hear. It's pretty much whatever the chairman says consensus is. So, and you find this on all the different things that the UN happens to have. I remember one time I was in Istanbul. It was dealing with a different issue. But all of Latin America was against what the chairman was doing. The Arab countries had to do with a lot of family value issues. And really, I could find scant people supporting the initiative of the UN other than some Western European nations, Canada and the US. So I said, how can you say there's consensus when it seems like the majority of people are against it? And he just says, it's hard to define. Basically, I say there's consensus, it looks like consensus. And that's basically the way it works. If the chairman says it's consensus, it is. So, you know, the UN is a body that I think does not, it's kind of a, you know, they do not go by, how do you put it, rule of law as we would necessarily or customarily work it here in the United States.
I'm very concerned about what's going on in our schools. A friend sent Xerox of pages out of his textbook in Loudoun County, and it said that global warming was a fact. And gave all these ridiculous reasons I knew were wrong. Do you ever have speakers go into school to give the other side of the story?
We try, and yes, we have sent some speakers in the schools. We actually have a collegiates program for the upper universities where we bring this information out on our college campuses. But it's very difficult to get into the public schools because unless you're invited, you won't be able to get in there and say very much. So it's really, what we have done is work with a lot of parents who contact us. And one of the things I said about getting informed is when you hear about this, we can provide information or point you to information that the student, through some courage, may have to take that information and present to the class or to the teacher. But yes, we stand ready. We have all sorts of information that we can put in simple terms that almost anybody can understand. All right.
Thank you so much. That was a
Well, thank you for coming.